Hey everybody, welcome back to RotoCurve.com. I'm Josh Collacchi, here to discuss Week 10 NFL on FanDuel tournament picks. Of course, this week you've seen us discuss the cash game picks. These are the safe options. These are the options to use in 50-50s and head-to-heads, but that's not what this video is about. We're here to talk about guys with upside. These are guys to use in tournaments, in the guaranteed prize pools, like the big tournaments where you can win a lot of money. Now, all these guys have risks, but they do have upside as well, which make them good tournament plays. So let's get right into it. At quarterback, I like Aaron Rodgers at 9,200 against Detroit. Now, we just talked about some of these guys have risk, and you may be thinking, why is Aaron Rodgers a risk? But at 9,200, any player is a risk because you're expecting enormous value back from him. Now, the reasons why I like Rodgers despite the price is last week, despite a losing effort, he was incredible against the Panthers with 369 yards and 4 touchdowns and rode to 34 FanDuel points against actually one of the better passing defensive teams in the NFL. So if Rodgers can do it against them, he can do it against everybody. And in Week 10, he faces Detroit Lions, who have actually been one of the worst teams in the NFL against the pass. As you can see, Detroit has allowed the third most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks this season. And considering the fact that Rodgers' price is at 9,200, I can't use him in cash, although I do think he's a relatively safe option. It's just that the expected return at that given price is huge. You're looking for somewhere over about 25 FanDuel points or maybe 27 or more in tournaments. So I like him in tournaments because he does have that elite upside, but at that price, I just can't use him in cash games. A cheaper quarterback this week is a guy who I love in tournaments, and that's Blake Bortles of Jacksonville for $7,800 against the Baltimore Ravens. Bortles' price is higher than we pretty much ever dreamed of for him because he was a guy that would be in the mid 6,000s, low 7,000s, and he's close to 8,000 this week. Now, I think that's a good thing for tournaments because that's going to limit his exposure in these big tournaments in terms of own percentages, because a guy like Bortles, who's just a little bit cheaper than other top options, is not going to be very heavily owned because people will look at that price and choose someone else. But I think that makes him a good tournament play at a low ownership because he still has an excellent matchup against the Ravens. Baltimore has given up the second most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks this season. They've given up 16 touchdown passes in the last 7 games. And Bortles has actually been really consistent in terms of throwing touchdown. He has had interception problems. Jacksonville Jaguars are still losing a lot of football games, but that gives him the floor of the ability to pass a lot. He has 2 great weapons in Allen Hurns and Allen Robinson. And considering Baltimore's secondary is one of the worst in the NFL, I like Bortles a lot to potentially have a 3 or 4 touchdown game, which is what you're going to need in GPP. For running back, there are 3 guys here that I don't think are safe for cash, but they do have good upside plays in this for this week in Week 10. The first one is DeMarco Murray for the Philadelphia Eagles at 7,700 against the Miami Dolphins. Murray's been excellent in the last few weeks, and he's returned to fantasy relevancy after really struggling through the first 3 weeks. We saw him. We couldn't get past the line of scrimmage. Now, whether that was his fault or fault of his offensive line, which I'm pretty sure if any of us watched the Eagles, we knew that their guards were really struggling earlier this year. That's irrelevant at this point because at 7,700, he's still cheaper than some of the top options, but he's been putting out top production in the last few weeks. He has 18 carries or more in each of the last 4 games. He scored 20.1 FanDuel points or more in 3 of the last 4 games. The one anomaly coming against the Carolina Panthers, who have one of the better rush defenses in the NFL. So Murray has been very good lately. He's scored touchdowns, I believe, in 3 of his last 4 games. He's a threat in the passing game, catching at least 2 passes in every game this season. And considering the Eagles' offense seems to be clicking a little bit, it's not I don't know what the word I'm looking for here is, but it's not necessarily a thing to look at Murray because that offense has been clicking in one way. But if you look at the way he's been used in the passing game and in the running game, considering he has all these touches, it makes for a fact that the Eagles' offense has been running through Murray. And at 7,700 against the Miami Dolphins, I think he makes for an excellent play in tournaments. Moving on to Justin Forsett for Baltimore at 7,100 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Forsett has had some tough games this season. He's notched under 10 FanDuel points in 4 of his 8 games, but in the other half, he has 12, 13.6, 25, and 15 FanDuel points, respectively. Now, what does this mean? It makes him an option that only use in GPPs because, as you can see, he's had a very low floor, but a very high ceiling with those 25 FanDuel points. So in a good matchup, I'm looking to consider him in GPPs. He faces the Jaguars in Week 10, who have given up just under 25 FanDuel points per game to opposing running backs. And that's a huge number, especially because Forsett sees most of the touches. He's played a lot of the snaps. Now, some snaps have gone to Javorius Allen, but Forsett is still the lead back. And considering they're giving up 25 FanDuel points per game, this gives him a chance to score roughly 20, which is a big number at 7,100 on FanDuel. The third guy is James Starks, who, if you may or may not heard, has taken the starting job from Eddie Lacy in Green Bay. Now, I can't use him in cash games because Eddie Lacy is still expected to see a lot of carries. Mike McCarthy said that they're still going to use the 1-2 punch, but for now, Starks is the lead back, and that makes him an option in tournaments at just 6,000 on FanDuel against Detroit. The Lions have given up over 25 FanDuel points per game to opposing running backs. They've given up 7 rushing touchdowns in the last 4 games. And if you've watched Stark, he's actually looked a lot better than Lacy. He has an excellent ability to run the ball out of the backfield in terms of the quickness and the speed that Lacy just doesn't have. And that's something the Packers offense has been missing. So look for him to take advantage of that starting spot. And at just 6,000 against Detroit, he's worth an option in GPPs. Moving on to wide receivers, A.J. Green is one of my favorite GPP receivers simply because of the fact that he has the upside to be a top 3 NFL wide receiver each week, but he has struggled sometimes because the Bengals like to spread the ball around, especially to Tyler Eifert at tight end. Now, as you can see here, Green has been the epitome of a tournament option because he is boom or bust. And he has 3 games under 10 fantasy points, 5 games with 12 FanDuel points or less. But he has 2 games of 23.3 and 39.7 FanDuel points. Now, what's this mean? It gives him the ability to have a huge game, but he also has a low floor as well, which means I can only use him in GPPs. Now, he has a good matchup, and I think this could be one of the weeks where he scores one of those top finishers at wide receiver. His matchup against the Houston Texans, who have been torched by number 1 receivers this season. They haven't seen many of them, but in the games that they have, Mike Evans caught 7 passes for 101 yards, and Allen Robinson caught 6 catches for 86 yards and a touchdown. I think it's Green's turn now. Now, one more thing I wanted to mention is if you go back and look at the game logs, you will see that Julio Jones struggled against the Texans, but that was the week he was hobbled. So Leonard Hankerson was the number 1 receiver for the Falcons. In that game, Hankerson caught, I believe, 6 catches for over 100 yards and a touchdown. So it shows that the Texans have struggled against number 1s, and that's exactly what A.J. Green is, which makes him an interesting play in GPP this weekend on FanDuel. The next guy is Martavis Bryant, 6,500 against the Cleveland Browns. Bryant has been one of my favorite tournament plays all year long simply because of his elite upside and his big play ability. But the one thing about him is the first game this season, he had 29.5 FanDuel points. But since then, he's combined for just over 30 FanDuel points in 3 games. So that's not getting it done. He's not very safe for cash. But the one thing about that big game, he did have Landry Jones throwing the ball to him. And Jones is expected to start this weekend for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that makes Bryant an attractive option because he obviously has some chemistry going with Landry Jones. We saw when Pittsburgh was practicing earlier in the preseason and training camp, Jones was working out with the 2s and the 3s, and that makes Martavis Bryant line up there because he was suspended. So they have developed a chemistry, and that was obvious in that first game where Martavis went for nearly 30 FanDuel points. He faces the Cleveland Browns, who have given up just below 30 FanDuel points per game to opposing wide receivers this season. And considering the fact that Antonio Brown's going to be taking a ton of attention away from Martavis Bryant, that leaves one of the biggest and fastest players in the NFL in a one-on-one situation. And that's exactly what we want to see for GPP. We could see a long touchdown, and that's going to bring him to value right away. The third guy is Dorial Green-Beckham for the Tennessee Titans at 5,200 against Carolina Panthers. DGB is his nickname, and he's finally seeing playing time. Last week, he saw the majority of the snaps. He saw 10 targets and put up an excellent line of 5 catches for 77 yards in his first real game in the NFL. I think that he's going to be one of these receivers that kind of bursts onto the scene in the next few weeks simply because he's a matchup nightmare. He's over 6'5", 230 pounds. He's really fast. He has great hands. And considering the fact that the Titans have a new coaching system and Kendall Wright has been struggling And when he has been on the field, when he hasn't been on the field, he's been hurt. So if you consider the fact that Dorial Green-Beckham might be the #1 receiver in Tennessee, at just 5,200 against Carolina, he makes for an interesting option. Now, I can't use him in cash because Josh Norman is there. So if Kendall Wright plays, Norman's expected to shadow him. But if not, DGB is going to see Josh Norman. So I can't take that chance in cash game. But in GPPs, he's a touchdown waiting to happen. And at that price, I'm willing to take the chance. Moving on to tight ends, there's 2 guys this week that I like in tournaments. One is a little bit of a safer option, and the other one is just a punt play, which means a guy that's really cheap that you're putting into your lineups at the end because you don't have much money left. First guy is Gary Barnidge for the Cleveland Browns at 6,100 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Barnidge has been one of those guys that just kind of came out of nowhere this year. He was always a blocking tight end in the past, but he's really found his stride as a pass-catching tight end this year. As he's had 6 games of 13 FanDuel points, and those all came in a row in the last 6 weeks before last week. But with Johnny Manziel at quarterback, he has tended to struggle. Josh McCown could be the quarterback this week, which gives Barnidge a boost. Barnidge's matchup this week is the main reason why I'm targeting him as he faces the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers are giving up 7 touchdown passes or 7 touchdown receptions, rather, to tight ends this year. They've given up just under 14 FanDuel points per game to opposing tight ends. And they're one of the top matchups to target if you are looking at tight ends. At Barnidge's price, he's only a GPP option for me simply because there's other options that are closer in price, like Tyler Eifert. And I think those guys are worth using in cash games because Gary Barnidge's value has really been hindering on his touchdown production. So if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's not going to be an excellent option in cash. But he does score a touchdown, and he has in the past. That shows you it to be a very good GPP play, especially at $2,000 less than Rob Gronkowski, as he does have similar upside. Kyle Rudolph is the other guy I wanted to look at. He's just a punt option at 4,700 against the Raiders. He's next in line for that train. We talk about it every week, tight ends against the Raiders. And they've just seemed to score touchdowns every week. They gave up another one last week. They've given up 9 touchdowns, most in the NFL. They've given up over 15 FanDuel points to tight ends this season, which is also the most second to most in the NFL behind the New Orleans Saints, but it is very close. Rudolph is rarely used by the Vikings, though, and that means that I just can't use him in cash game. He only has 2 catches in each of his last 6 or 7 games, something like that. So he doesn't have elite upside in terms of catches, but he can catch touchdowns, and that's exactly what we've seen for the Oakland Raiders this year. They've given up a lot of touchdowns to tight ends. So at 4,700, if he can just catch 1 touchdown pass, you're going to see decent value out of him at just 4,700, and his cap space will allow you to put pretty much any other guys you want at other positions, especially if you get one more cheap guy in your lineup. So if you want to put Rudolph in your lineup and maybe a Dorial Green-Beckham, you can get pretty much anybody else you want at in the rest of your FanDuel lineup in GPP. That wraps up this week's video on tournament picks for FanDuel. Thanks for watching, and as always, be sure to give us a thumbs up so we can continue to bring you analysis each and every week. You can find videos like these, content like this, everything over at RotoCurve.com. It's all free. There's a ton of tools, ton of data, everything you can think of to make this week and every week a profitable one on FanDuel. So be sure to check it out. Give us a thumbs up, and be sure to enjoy this week in NFL football. Good luck, everybody.